That's not coming from me.
Awesome. Good morning, class. How is everybody doing today? Me too. Me too. We are going to continue our study of the book of Genesis. I think we had one Sunday off. It feels like 3 months. I went and looked at my notes, and it was like, I have no memory of this place. Well, welcome. We are going to do a real quick high-level review of what we studied so far, and then we'll push into new material. I always say we're going to do a quick review, and then sometimes it takes half the class, but I'll try to be more disciplined today. The book of I don't have this shirt. Maybe. The book of Genesis, the word Genesis in English comes straight from Greek, and it's the word for beginning, and that's how many of the books are named. And, when we think about Genesis, we often go straight to the creation story. You might think, well, that's what it means by in the beginning, why we call it Genesis. And that's probably true to some extent. But the book is actually a lot bigger than that. We've finished the creation story in 2 chapters, basically. The fall was chapter 3. We got a whole lot of books still ahead of us. So what is it the beginning of? Well, by the end of the book, we will get Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph in Egypt. What's the second book of the Bible? Exodus. And when you think about Exodus, you think about this great nation that is Israel being led out of slavery and into the promised land, right? But at the end of Genesis, they're just going into Egypt, and it's still basically just one family, right? It's Israel, Jacob, and his 12 sons, give or take. So while it is valid to say that Genesis is the story of the beginning of the world, that's absolutely true and a very important part of the book, theologically and for a number of reasons. But also it's the beginning of God's people. It's about the origin of God's people and his promises to them. So we'll be widening our scope to that here very soon. There are probably a number of familiar Sunday school stories that you get out of Genesis. And as often happens, if you only study the story in Sunday school as a child, you will miss a lot. So we'll see what we can do about expanding our vision. Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 both tell the story of God creating the world. Who of you who have been here for several weeks can tell me, why do we tell the story twice? You didn't know there'd be a quiz, did you? Why do we tell the story twice? That's right. So the same story is told with 2 different focuses. Foci? I don't know how to say that one. Is it foci? I don't know. 2 different focuses, right? The first time, it's very general and broad. It's how God made the whole world, which to the ancient mind, before the invention of things like telescopes or calculus, if you talk about the creation of the whole world, you're talking about the creation of everything. Now, in our age, we think about the universe being much bigger than our planet, right? So when we read into this story, we shouldn't let the scale of the narrative limit the scale of our thinking about it, right? So even though almost all of it's focused on planet Earth and everything relative to planet Earth, it's okay for us who, as just people, have a different perspective of the universe to project outwards as well. So when it talks about God making the stars and setting them in the sky, what we understand by that is God made stars, and they're incomprehensibly far away with light that travels at incomprehensible speeds to reach our planet. And they're positioned such that from our vantage point, we get a beautiful view of them at night. And that's what it means that God set them in our sky. Not that they're little globs of light suspended in our atmosphere, right? But a pre-flight human isn't thinking in those terms. You know what I mean? So just make sure that we read that. And I talked about that principle, and it's an important principle as we approach all of Scripture, I believe, which is the idea that whenever God speaks to us, he does so with loving condescension, right? If I went to CERN or even NASA and talked to some of their high-level physicists about what it is they do, if they speak to me like a peer, I will miss a lot of it. If they speak to me like a layperson, I'll understand more, right? Even though there were probably more precise ways he could have said the same thing. And what he would tell me is probably the truth, or she would tell me the truth, but he would do so, or she would do so in a way that would help me understand it at my level, right? And if you've ever spoken to a toddler, you've done the same thing. You condescend for their sake, because without that condescension, what you want to communicate will be utterly lost. That make sense? Every time God talks to man, God who is transcendent and knows the deep mysteries of the universe, he will speak to us in a manner in which we can grasp, or slightly above what we can grasp, even though what he'll say is true. Make sense? So just, allow yourself that liberty. When people get too narrow about this stuff, this is where like Galileo gets in trouble with the church, right? Because he's talking about the movement of stars or whatever, and like they just misunderstand how to read this. Okay, so in that initial creation, what were some of the notable differences from the world in which we currently live? Don't overthink it, just shout it out. No death, that's right. And interestingly, as described, if you read it with care, you'll find that as described, nothing, not even plants, had to die. Like when a sheep eats the grass of the field, right? Or when a giraffe eats the leaves of a tree, or what have you, they don't have to kill the plant to do that, right? And when a person or an animal eats the fruit of a tree, you're not hurting the tree, and in fact, you may help it propagate. So there was no predation, there was no death. Any other differences that you noted in that initial creation, that Garden of Eden situation they had going on? No self-consciousness. And why would they need it, right? Because self-consciousness is a problem for people who are imperfect. That just wasn't a problem. Well, while we're at that, what would they have been self-conscious of? Let's get specific. Yeah, they were naked. They were naked. And naked is an idea that doesn't make any sense in a world where nothing is clothed. But it implies a lack, right? So Adam and Eve were ashamed because they believed they lacked something. Now, what are the purposes? What are the practical purposes for clothing? Modesty is one, right? But otherwise, do you dress the same all year long? Why not? The environment changes, right? So in the winter, what do you do? Well, let's start here. In the summer, what do you do? Sweat and dye, yeah. Shorts, if you can manage it, right? Light clothes that are well ventilated, probably something on your head to cover, to give you some shade. Because the sun is hostile. Okay, now what about in the winter? What do you do? Shorts, but you wear socks with your sandals, right? You layer up, you would put a coat on, right? Because the environment is hostile to you, right? We seek shelter from the rain. We don't want to sleep. You don't want to sleep exposed. Even if you're camping, you probably brought a tent, right? I love the great outdoors, but I'd like a little bit of indoors at least. So they sensed this lack, but that lack didn't make sense in a world that wasn't hostile to them by nature. But now that sin enters the world, the whole world is hostile to them and they to the world. A couple other good reminders before we move into our thing for today. This is a 50-50 for you. Just make your best guess if you don't know the answer. Was the command to be fruitful and multiply given before the fall into sin and the entrance of death as a way of handling the problem of death? Or did the command to be fruitful and multiply come before sin and death entered the world? It was before. That command came before, which means that for God, the propagation of life is not a response to death. It's something that he just values as part of his perfect creation. What was Adam's job in the garden? Okay, so he named the animals. What was the other thing? God gave him dominion, right? And with that dominion, he was supposed to name the animals. And what was he supposed to do in the garden? Yeah, he was supposed to tend to the garden and help it produce, right? He's supposed to be a gardener. So he was given basically two jobs. Hold those in your head. All right, so we looked at the fall into sin. Oh, we talked about God making people, male and female. He created them both in his image. And since God is, at least from the perspective of humans, has not yet been incarnate in the Christ, for God to say that he made man in his image, man and woman he made in his image, probably we aren't talking about physical appearance, right? It's something else. So that something else is maybe something to do with our souls, maybe something to do with our position in creation, right? Because Adam was made from the dirt of the ground, no other creature was, but he was animated by the breath of God entering him, no other creature was. So Adam represents the intersection of God's Spirit and his creation. So man has both a special connection to God and a special connection to the earth. The tendency, I find, is that modern people, and probably people throughout history, would like to make it one or the other, right? So that special connection to the earth can show out in basically deifying the earth, right? People who worship the earth, whether that's the green-minded people who go far enough as to say that humans are a plague upon the earth, or who essentially worship Mother Earth, and that can also show up in spiritual ways, right? Paganism and other things. Or the other side of it, where people think so much about our spiritual selves, our souls, that they discount the holiness and the sanctity of the creation that God made, right? We're meant to be a bridge between those two things. Talked about being made in God's image, male and female, He created them. Fallen sin happens, and it happens as Eve is led into temptation by the serpent, who perhaps was a dragon. Takes a little bit of reading Revelation into Genesis to get there, but it does kind of fit, right? Nevertheless, she is taken in and deceived. Perhaps she would like to be deceived. She eats, she gives the fruit to her husband, he eats, and they both realize that they are naked and ashamed. And they make clothes for themselves and hide from God. So immediately you can see they are afraid of the world as they dress themselves in fig leaves, and they are afraid of God. So their relationship with creation is fractured, their relationship with God is fractured. And you can see pretty quickly that their relationship with each other is fractured too, because God comes asking, "Where are you, Adam? Where are you, Eve?" And they step out and say, "We were hiding," right? And God said to you, "Did you eat the fruit I told you not to eat?" And Eve blames the serpent, one of God's creation, right? And Adam blames Eve. So in that short couple paragraphs, we get an encapsulation of the ravages of sin, just that fast. God tells them what will happen because of this. The serpent is cursed to crawl on his belly and forecasted to bruise the heel of Eve's offspring when he bruises the snake's head. He's going to crush the snake under his foot, and in doing so will be wounded. We, of course, understand this is a prophecy about Jesus, of course. To the woman, she is told that because of what has happened, now childbearing will be painful and dangerous. Kind of wonder what the world would be like if it wasn't so. You know, don't you? Childbearing is, like, at the same time, probably one of the scariest things that that a mother and even to some extent her husband, because he cares for her, will endure. And then from that comes great joy. But wouldn't it be wonderful if it was just the joy without the trauma? But so it is. To Adam, the pronouncement is, because of what you have done, the world is now hostile. It will no longer yield its fruit to you generously. You'll have to work hard to get it. Thorns and thistles have sprung up from the ground. And I would say to you that that is a narrow and agrarian way of describing a brokenness of an entire universe. When I think about the way that the cosmos are constantly drifting farther and farther apart as we see the death of stars happen, right? And as we forecast that even our sun one day could burn out. Or if Jesus doesn't come back before then, one day will burn out. All of that, I believe, is what God is describing when he talks about the difficulty and hardship that the world now will yield. Yeah.
God made the garden. Man was outside of the garden.
It could be. It could be. It is worth noting, though, that why God drove them out of the garden was not to remove them from the nice area of town, but because there was where the tree of life is. And as we discussed a couple weeks ago, the trouble with the tree of life is if you are trapped in your sin and you live forever, well, that's just a description of hell, right? Evil will multiply, and the ravages of evil will multiply within you. And it is, I think, in some way fair to say that the introduction of death into the world is, for Adam and Eve, at least some kind of a mercy, but certainly not God's intent for his creation, right? So God will one day do away with death, but before he can do that, he has to deal with the problem of sin. So what about this area outside the garden? I don't know. My suspicion would be, by analogy, you could say, well, in the temple that God built, there was the holy place, and then there was the most holy place. Which one was holy? Both of them. But there was an area that was reserved as a special place, right? For God to be close to his people and for special things to happen there. And I think and this is just my own mind, you can make it what you will, but it seems to me like that might be a good way of kind of analogizing the Garden of Eden. Right? It is, while all of creation was pristine and all of creation was wonderful, the garden was a special place for the devotional life that Adam and Eve were supposed to have, and the intimacy with God they were supposed to have. And it was supposed to be a place from which, I think, the amazing things God had in mind would spill out from there. That would be the epicenter. You know what I mean? Or it's the jewel in the crown of God's creation. Yeah. Best guess on how long they were in the garden before the fall. My best guess would be between 12 hours and 1,000 years. I would tend more on the 12-hour side than the 1,000-year side. They weren't there long enough to make a baby. But also, correct. And as we'll see probably in a week or two, a lot of these early humans are very late bloomers. We'll get there. I mapped out the genealogy up to Moses, or up to Noah. So we'll talk about that in a couple weeks, probably. Yes, sir. This whole class is off topic. Go ahead. Perfect question, to which I have no answer. Yes. Right. Yeah, but did it look more like did he look more like Danny DeVito or Vin Diesel? I don't know. I no way of knowing. Here's something that we do know, right? In our current world, your environment and your diet, and over time, those factors then impact genetics over long spans of time. People have changed, right? Like we are probably way taller than the founding fathers of our country. Yeah. 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 And a lot of that has to do with, we're medicine's one thing, nutrition, we are able to consistently just get all the Our problem is we have an abundance of nutrition. Yeah, might be. So again, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't picture Adam and Eve to be cave people, but I don't know. Idealized us's. Probably not. Yeah, I would. I'm hard pressed to think they were blonde and white. Maybe. I don't know. And I think it's a mercy of God that we're not given physical descriptions of them. Because if we were, the thing that would happen, guarantee, yeah, people would point at that as saying, well, this is God's design, this is what it's supposed to be like. And people, in the name of Christianity or Judaism or whatever, would become racist or eugenicists, right? And so by God's mercy, I'm also glad we don't have pictures of Jesus from contemporaries, you know? And so what happens is that every culture sort of reads onto Jesus what he looks like, you know? And some of us modern people have tried to go, okay, well, what would people in that area, in that time look like? And so now maybe we're a little bit more comfortable with Jesus having some darker skin and some curly hair or whatever, you know? But it doesn't, what he looked like has nothing to do with who he is, you know? So, interesting questions, but I want to go on. All right. So Adam and Eve made for themselves clothes, and those clothes were not very good. The fig leaves that they sewed together. So as God removes them from the garden, he gives them clothes. Their clothes were made of leaves. The clothes that God gave them were made of animal skins. Where do we think that came from? Animals. And so you get, no, right. No, I mean, you know, God could have just poofed them into existence, right? But why would the story describe it as animal skins then? Which means that. Yeah. We'll get to the hairy guy in a few chapters. But consider this, though. That means that the first sacrifice ever offered up to cover over man's sin was made by God. And from the very beginning, it has taken sacrifice of blood to cover over sin. Now, God knows what he's doing, right? We get elsewhere in Scripture the idea that Christ is, that the Son of God was appointed Christ from the creation of the world. So God knew. And of course he would. So it is not anachronistic or inappropriate to read into these early stories figures of Christ. They're there because God was pointing at it from the beginning. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and my intuition is that much of what we see in the interactions between God and Adam and Eve is instructional, right? Where'd they learn how to talk? So yeah, the idea of, you know, how do you slaughter an animal? How do you prepare their skins for clothes? You know, they never had to cook before. Cooking is going to get real important real fast. Go for it. Mm. Okay. I don't I don't think this. Go ahead. No, no, please. Let's make a little bit of a distinction. Let's make a little bit of a distinction. Work existed before the fall. But I'm going to use the word toil. Maybe that's not the right word, but I'm going to use the word toil. Toil comes after, right? Yeah, well, so does work. But if the reduction of work is for the purpose of idleness, it's probably not God-pleasing. And you can know this pretty easily because if you find people who are idle, they are not happy. They are not healthy, right? Idleness is not good for the person. However, if we have things that can ameliorate hardship, that's not intrinsically bad, right? Like I don't think the invention of the plow is inherently bad, even though it made the work of farming easier, right? So, yeah, exactly. And civilization is very much about this idea of economies of scale and specialization. But all that to say, I think that you make a good distinction, right? Because work does give purpose. And as I'm raising my son, talking to him about what he wants to do with his life, whether he makes a lot of money or not a big deal to me. Whether he goes to college or a trade school, not a big deal to me. That he finds a place that he can serve people through his work, that matters to me, right? Because that's where purpose and meaning are found. And that could be at a desk job. It could be digging ditches, it could be building cars, it could be whatever, right? So having that purpose, that ability to serve his fellow man and serve God through that matters. Does that give you a comprehensive answer to your question? Okay. Yeah, I think so. Well, asterisk. New earth. Because we talk, Revelation. When we talk about in heaven, sometimes that's a shorthand for, yeah. All right. But I am running long. I am gonna plow ahead, to pardon the callback. So Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Again, one of those familiar stories, but let's take it carefully. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Now, literally, it says, I've gotten, with the help of the Lord is even a little bit of an imposition on the text. In the Hebrew, it really says, I've gotten a man from the Lord. That's how she describes, or he. It's a little unclear to me who's speaking here. How they describe where the child came from. The proximal cause, like the obvious near cause, is Adam and Eve came together and made a child. Right? Every day on planet Earth, people are making children. And it is not obvious to them that it's from God. And in this very first creative act that Adam and Eve have, it would be so easy for them to look at it as a work they did. But they understand something that maybe we don't, naturally, which is that they already know it's from God. And here's another fascinating thing I'd like you to point out. I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. In your Bible, is that all caps? Yeah, which means it's not actually the word Lord, it's the personal name of God. So even Genesis chapter 4, they already know the personal name of God. And if you think that that came from Moses asking God and God giving him a name at that moment, no. Back here in dialogue, they're using the name of the Lord. Okay, I just think that's an interesting note. Let's keep going. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Adam was a worker of the ground. All right, so I want you to remember back to just a moment ago. When Adam was in the garden, what was the work he was given to do? Gardening and tending the animals, right? He was naming them. He's not described as an animal keeper, though. The word keep in Hebrew, and again, we're working from the Hebrew language originally. At least the texts we've received are in Hebrew. That word keep has a broad meaning. Because you'll hear about the Lord is the keeper of Israel or things like that, right? He who keeps Israel. When it says keep, it's not as we often use it in English, like I'm going to keep my phone in my pocket. As in possess it in that place. It does mean that, but it means a lot more than that. So to be a keeper means to be one who watches over, to be one who guards. That's what it means to keep. We're instructed to keep God's commands, right? It means that we hold them dear and they remain in our attention, right? So Abel is referred to as a keeper of sheep. In the garden, there was no need to keep the animals. Because what's the job of a shepherd? Tell me, what's the job of a shepherd? What does a shepherd do? Because that's what's being described here. What does a shepherd do? He protects, right? He takes them where they need to go to make sure that they are properly fed and watered, which implies limitation, not abundance, right? And he protects them, which implies danger and predators. So Abel, so the two jobs that Adam had, I didn't finish this up. The two jobs that Adam had in the garden, he was a gardener, right? Which means he worked the plants and helped them produce. And he befriended the animals. Adam and Eve have two sons right away. And one works the ground and helps the plants produce. And the other guards the animals. Now you can tell their jobs have nuanced. They've changed because of sin. But the work is being passed on, right? Interestingly, where Adam was just allowed to befriend and name the animals, now the role that Abel assumes is really one who mediates violence, right? He protects the sheep from their predators and potentially, if he can't frighten them away, has to visit violence upon the predators, right? Now, when you think about Cain and Abel, which one do you tend to think of as being more comfortable with violence? Intuitively, which one would you think? Really? Cain, yeah, because he's a killer, right? But right now in the story, it doesn't seem that way. Right, yeah. But I mean, when we think about Cain and Abel as characters, Cain always gets the rap as a killer. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Meaning what? What did Abel do? He had to sacrifice. He had to slaughter animals. Okay. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain his offering, he had no regard. I've always had to puzzle at this a little bit. Because there's things I wish it said that would make it easier, you know? Like if it said, Abel brought his best, which it says, but Cain brought the leftovers, you go, oh, well, that makes sense. It doesn't say that exactly. There's room for that to be what happened. And maybe it is. But here's what I can say for sure. For Abel, it's clear that the sacrifice was very dear. Right? These are the creatures that he would risk his health and protection for them, and then he in turn offers one of them up. So you can see at least how momentous this would be for Abel. And for Cain, it does seem easier. Now, I don't know what the right sacrifice would have been for Cain. Maybe between he and God, that was clear. But what is clear to us is that what Abel brought was a good offering. Also worth noting that we are already getting formal worship. Far ahead of a temple, far ahead of a priesthood, far ahead of any of that stuff. And the worship that we see, the worship of God that we see, most fundamentally, isn't singing songs. It isn't praying prayers. Most of what we consider to be ritualized worship, it isn't. What's the most fundamental act of worship, according to Genesis? Sacrifice. Good question. No, in the Passover you eat the lamb. Although they don't currently because of the destruction of the temple. That's a whole thing that we're not going to talk about right now. But, yeah, well, they were instructed to eat the lamb, right? But, so here's the thing you should know. Once temple worship begins, there are a number of different kinds of sacrifices, most of which involve sharing the food between the priests and the people who bring the offering, and dedicating some portion of it to God. There are some offerings that you just bring, you wave them in front of the altar, and then you enjoy them. These are called wave offerings, that's the thing. But which might not be so different than when we sit down and pray over our meals before we eat them. But there were some sacrifices in which the people would consume none of it. The whole animal would be given as a burnt offering. It would be burned up on the altar and people wouldn't eat any of it. Those were, and I know this is a difficult word for us these days, but those are the ones that were referred to as the Holocaust offerings. The whole thing is burned. So, yeah, usually, most of the offerings that you bring, yes, you are barbecuing with God. And God receives his portion as being burned up. And then the priests and the people who brought the offering share the rest. And it's a meal that you, yeah. But even just the act of bringing it to God and presenting it to God and saying, yes, thank you for this. We're throwing a party in your name. That's a big part of it, right? So the different kinds of offerings are done different ways. Most of the offerings, the people bringing the offering got to share in it. Most of them, not all of them. In this case, it seems that because it says he brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. So it seems to me like if he's not offering the whole animal, he is offering the best cuts to God. Something else to consider. God still speaks to these people directly, which makes me wonder if, as he was described as walking in the garden in the previous chapter, that implies some kind of actual presence, some sort of physical presence perhaps. Maybe God is there incarnate, eating with them. I don't know. But you could imagine that if you sat at a table with God and you're carving up the barbecue, you probably want to give God the choice pieces, right? And that's what it seems that Abel has done. What's up? I should probably stop. No, let's do one more verse. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." I think this is an important part for us to get from the Cain and Abel offering story, which is to say, God is saying to Cain, you know the offering that you brought is not the right thing. You know that. I'm open, and I invite you to do what's right. Because your self-interest, your greed, your whatever it is that's holding you back from giving the right offering is sin wanting to devour you. It's turning you in on yourself. And if you could let that go, we could be in a good relationship, and that's what I want from you. I want a good relationship with you, but I'm not going to force it, right? You'll notice that there is nothing punitive in anything God says here. He doesn't threaten any kind of punishment, right? He's just saying, things aren't right. You know they're not right. But we could get it right. It is. Yeah, I suppose that's probably right. God invited Adam and Eve to come talk to him in the garden. And that is, in a sense, a call to repentance. It's at least a call to confession. Yeah, in the sense of like a call to a change in behavior. Yeah, this is definitely a call to repentance. Okay, I need to stop because we got church coming up in just a few minutes. So thank you so much. Great questions today. I love dialoguing with you guys. We will just pick up approximately where we are now, Genesis chapter 4, we'll probably go back to verse 3 a little bit, and then we'll move forward from there next week. So go freshen up your coffee. We'll see you in worship.